just saying this morning about coming out of sesshin is where you lose your keys, trip over your feet, and okay. And that's what happens. All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. So a bunch of us, within the last couple of hours, have finished a 5-day sesshin. And right before that, the day before that, Hojo-san and Shinko and I got off a plane from Los Angeles, where we'd done 5 days at Soto-shu, doing ceremonies for the 100th anniversary of Soto Zen in North America and the beginnings of the 700th memorial for Keizan Zenji. So after 10 days of fairly intensive Zen life, it was a little much to ask Shinko to be prepared to speak about the Dharma in English in front of everybody. So you've got this one. So today we return to the 108 Gates of Dharma-Illumination. So as everybody knows, that's a text I've been talking about for a while. We've not talked about it here since before the Ango began. So quick review. This was included within the 12 fascicle version of Dogen's Shobogenzo. He did not write it. It comes from a longer Chinese text called the Sutra of the Collected Past Deeds of the Buddha. But Dogen did write some paragraphs encouraging us to investigate these gates. So clearly it was important. So I've been talking about this text since, get this, 2016. So 7 long years I've been talking about this text. Golly, I didn't realize it had been that long. So back in 2016, Buddha Dharma magazine picked up my article on the first of these Dharma gates, and we were kind of off to the races. So all these many years later, we're now at gate 96 of 108. So our gate statement for today says, acceptance of the right Dharma is a gate of Dharma illumination, for it eradicates the afflictions of all living beings. So this acceptance of the right Dharma or the true Dharma is not just a random phrase. It's actually got a fairly large backstory, and that backstory comes from the Sutra of Queen Shrimala of the Lion's Roar. And you may be familiar with that sutra. In the West, women practitioners in particular really like it because it's a woman who's doing the teaching. Buddha empowers this queen to do the teaching. So in the West, we sometimes hear about this text. But this sutra, this text, connects this phrase, acceptance of the right Dharma, with bodhisattva vows. So there's a strong intersection there. And this sutra kind of helps us to see that. So again, in this sutra, Buddha empowers this Indian queen, Shrimala, to teach the Dharma. She talks about Buddha nature and emptiness and Dharmakaya and the universality of the potential for all beings to become Buddha. And it's a fairly important text, fairly foundational text. But for our purposes today, one of the most important things about this sutra is that it includes 3 bodhisattva vows. And these are spoken by Queen Shrimala herself, and they are, by the power of my earnest aspiration, may I bring peace to innumerable and unlimited living beings. By my virtuous deeds throughout all rebirths, may I attain the wisdom of the true Dharma. The second one is, having attained the wisdom of the true Dharma, for the sake of all living beings, may I explain it without wearying. And third, in accepting the true Dharma, here's our gate statement, in accepting the true Dharma, may I abandon body, life, and wealth, and uphold the true Dharma. So in a minute, we'll talk about this giving up of body, life, and wealth. But first, let's just notice that accepting the true Dharma is a part of a bodhisattva vow. And that means it's about liberating all beings, right? So there's a strong connection here. So the gate statement says that accepting the true Dharma eradicates the afflictions of all living beings. So right away, we've got to know we're in the realm of bodhisattva activity. This is what bodhisattva activity is all about. So a minute ago, I said that accepting the true Dharma was part of the 3rd vow. But the Buddha says in this sutra, just as all forms are contained in space, so likewise the bodhisattva vows, which are as numerous as the sands of the Ganges River, are all contained in these 3 great vows. So this accepting the true Dharma is itself the broadest possible bodhisattva vow. Simply accepting the true Dharma is the largest bodhisattva vow we can make, sometimes called the Great Vow. So the sutra goes on to say that the results and the benefits of this great vow are immeasurable. There's no limit. So it says that they allow bodhisattvas to present teachings and vehicles appropriate to the needs of each practitioner, so everybody is included, right? So no matter who is in front of us, no matter who we're practicing with, no matter who we're trying to help, this vow allows us to use the right tool, to do the skillful thing, to say the right thing, depending on who's in front of us, and we know that changes all the time, right? It also says that the one accepting the true Dharma is identical with the true Dharma itself, and that the person who accepts the true Dharma is identical with the paramitas, or with the perfections. So let's look at these last two things. The one accepting true Dharma is identical with true Dharma itself. And that happens because this person abandons these three things: body, life, and wealth. So that sounds pretty extreme, right? Abandoning body, life, and wealth. It sounds pretty harsh, pretty ascetic, pretty unrealistic, not something we think would be comfortable or that we want to do. But we have to be careful about abandon here. Abandon does not mean harming the body. It does not mean ending our lives. It does not mean living in some kind of unwholesome, poverty-stricken state. Abandon here means giving up attachment to body and life and wealth, right? Doesn't mean we have to go out and eliminate those things. It means we give up our attachment to those things. So with regard to the body, our focus changes from old age, illness, death, right? The things we worry about related to the body, things that come with our birth in this human form, in this world of samsara. And our focus moves toward the Dharma body, or the Dharmakaya, right? This body without limit. So this human body is limited, this human body is impermanent, the Dharma body is without boundary in space and time. So this Dharma body is made up of Buddha's teachings, or same thing, reality, true reality of all beings. So Buddha is still here. This is why we can say Buddha is still here, even though his physical body died 2,500 years ago. We know that, he ate something. Well, we're pretty sure we know. He ate something. What that is depends on the story. Got sick, and the physical body died. And yet, in this tradition, we still have Buddha. We still say Buddha is here. We talk about three kinds of three treasures. So the Dharmakaya is ongoing, and Buddha is still here and still practicing and still functioning. So that's the body. With regard to life, our focus changes from being worried about our physical death, maybe being worried about not getting everything done before we die, or what's going to happen to our possessions once we're gone, or what happens to my soul when this body disappears. And we move toward cultivating prajna, or wisdom, and our understanding of the Buddha Dharma. So this prajna is also without boundaries in space and time, like the Dharmakaya. So finally, wealth. Then the third thing is wealth. So our habit changes from clinging, grasping, right, to generosity. We shift from needing to get things and keep things and protect, as much stuff as we can. And that can be physical stuff, but other stuff, right? Just things that we think we need. We move toward realizing that we're receiving offerings from all beings all the time anyway, right? No matter what we're doing, we're receiving offerings all the time anyway. We're also making offerings to all beings all the time anyway. This is Jiju Yutamai, right? Total dynamic functioning. So this is going on. This giving and receiving and giving and receiving is going on all the time. We don't need to be clinging to our stuff in order to make that happen, or in order to make things okay. So all the dharmas are interpenetrated, they're all functioning together, so it's not possible really for us to do anything in isolation, right? Sometimes the way I put that is we can't do anything in private. Everything we do is public, right? Because of this connection which is there anyway. So this one unified reality is this constant exchange between all the elements that are within it, which is pretty much everything, right? There's nothing outside the Buddha way. So clinging to a limited set of stuff in a kind of an unwholesome or unskillful way just stops making sense, right? When we see how this interconnection works, it's like clinging to my stuff doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. So the one accepting the true Dharma is identical with the true Dharma itself, because there's a shift from this kind of limited human condition in which we're worried about old age and sickness and death, and clinging tightly to our stuff as a way to kind of ward all that off, push all that away. And we're moving toward, instead, something which is much more expansive, right? A point of view or a way of moving through the world which is more open-hearted and more generous and wise and compassionate. So, something that's less self-centered. We move away from this kind of self-centered point of view to something which is much less self-centered, and that's what makes it possible to even consider trying to liberate all beings, right? It's pretty hard to think about helping somebody else if I'm only worried about this. So we see this pattern, right? Moving away from this closed, constricted, limited, stuck point of view towards something which is much more open, right? Much more broad. So if you practice here on weekday mornings, we read the Shobogenzo Zuimonki in the morning a little bit every day. And that Dogen frequently talks about abandoning body, life, and wealth for the sake of practice. This is something we hear over and over and over and over. He is constantly warning us against attachment to these things as a real obstacle to our practice, right? It just makes a real obstacle to our awakening if we're constantly clinging to body, life, and wealth. So, of course, in the Zuimonki, he's talking to people who have left home for the sake of the way, right? He's talking to ordained Sangha. And for those folks, the expectation really, is or was, that you give up just about everything. You rely on the Sangha for your provisions, for your housing, for your food. You may be practicing in some conditions which are not necessarily comfortable for the body. We've all just sat 5 days of Sesshin. We all know what that's like. So, he's talking to people who are making this the entirety of their lives. He's not so much in this case talking to householders or talking to laity. And yet, what he's saying is still valuable for us, right? So when he talks about dropping off body and mind, he's talking about releasing our attachment to personal views, clinging to what we think these 5 skandhas are, clinging to what we think we need. When he's talking about living in poverty, he's telling us to work with these 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance, right? So this is applicable outside of a quote-unquote monastic situation. So his point is, put practicing the Dharma at the center of whatever the lifestyle is that you're living. So if you're living in a temple, great. If you're living in a training temple, fine. If you're working in the world, if you own your own home, if you're raising a family, running a business, whatever you're doing, put practicing the Dharma at the center of that lifestyle. So don't make it a weekend hobby. Don't make it a self-improvement program. Make your bodhicitta the origin of your, thinking and moving, your thoughts, words, and actions, right? We talk a lot here at Sanshin about non-reliance, right? What's actually driving our practice? What's driving our practice is our bodhicitta and nothing other than that. So we need to make that bodhicitta the center, the origin of whatever it is we're thinking, doing, right? So a few examples from the Zuimonki we can hear from Dogen. Even though we might cherish our body and hold it dear, we cannot keep it forever. Abandoning our life, which we must leave behind sooner or later, if only for a day or a few moments for the sake of the Buddha Dharma, will surely be the cause of eternal happiness. Elsewhere he says, a person of the Buddha Dharma should not possess any treasure or property other than robes in a bowl. What is the need for a closet? I think that's very interesting. You should not own things which have to be hidden from others. You try to hide things because you are afraid of thieves. If you abandon them, you will be that much more at ease, right? So whatever comfort we're taking from our possessions, he says we'd probably be even more comfortable if we let go of them. We'd stop worrying about them, right? The primary point you should attend to is detaching yourself from personal views. To detach yourself from personal views means to not cling to your body. Even if you have thoroughly studied the words and stories of the ancient masters and have been practicing Zazen continuously and immovably like iron or rock, if you cling to your body and do not detach yourself from it, you will be unable to attain the way of the Buddhas and ancestors in 10,000 eons or 1,000 lifetimes. Even though you think you may have realized the provisional teachings and the true teachings or the authentic exoteric and esoteric scriptures, if you have not detached from the mind which clings to your body, it is like vainly counting another's wealth without possessing even a half penny of your own. I implore you to sit quietly and seek the beginning and the end of this body on the ground of reality. Your body, hair, and skin were originally comprised of the 2 droplets from your father and mother. Once the breath stops, they scatter and finally turn into mud and soil on the mountains and fields. How can you cling to your body? So it's very interesting. He's saying, where does this body actually come from? Where does it start? If we deeply investigate that, how can we cling to the body? Right? So there are many various other examples in the Zui monkey. We could go on for a long time. But he continues to come back to this idea that attachment to body, life, wealth, attachment to personal views is one of the major hindrances we face. Right? He's constantly admonishing us, look at what you're doing. Look at what you're doing. Look at where you're stuck. So again, one benefit of accepting the true Dharma is that the one accepting the true Dharma is identical with the true Dharma itself, and that person is able to abandon body, life, and wealth. So the last benefit of accepting the true Dharma, or the great vow, the person who accepts the true Dharma is identical with the paramitas, or the perfections. And these are, of course, giving, discipline, patience, perseverance, meditation, and wisdom. So we're all familiar probably with these paramitas. So within the Queen Shrimala Sutra, what this has to say in a condensed way, starting with giving, right? Good sons and daughters who accept the true Dharma give even their body and limbs for those who respond to giving. By protecting these living beings' intentions, they teach them. When they are thus taught and caused to abide in the true Dharma, this is called the perfection of giving. So each of these 6 then follows this same kind of form. So I'm going to truncate a little bit from here. Morality is the second one, right? Or discipline or morality. Good sons and daughters teach the protection of the 6 senses, the purification of body, speech, and mind, and the cultivation of the 4 correct postures in walking, standing, sitting, and reclining to those who respond to discipline. Goes on. Patience is the third one. Good sons and daughters teach non-hatred, supreme patience, and neutrality in outer expression to those who respond to patience. Fourth one is perseverance. Good sons and daughters do not teach indolence, but the desire to practice supreme perseverance and cultivation of the 4 correct postures to those who respond to perseverance. Fifth one is meditation. Good sons and daughters teach tranquility, constant mindfulness, not conditioned by external objects, and recollection of all actions and speech over long periods of time to those who respond to meditation. And finally, the 6th one is wisdom. Good sons and daughters, when questioned concerning the meaning of all things, extensively teach all treatises and all arts without trepidation, causing those who respond to wisdom to reach the ultimate in science and art. By protecting these living beings' intentions, they teach them. When they are thus taught and caused to abide in the true Dharma, this is the perfection of wisdom, or prajna, right? So I think it's interesting that in each case, the bodhisattva activity is to protect living beings' intention. Each one of these things says, by protecting these living beings' intentions, they teach them. That's interesting, right? In other words, help them cultivate their bodhicitta. Help them cultivate their aspiration. If we can support people to cultivate, work with, practice that aspiration, that is bodhisattva activity. Everyone has to do that for themselves, right? Nobody can give you bodhicitta. Nobody can give you an aspiration. Something happens and you have a desire to practice, but nobody can give you that. We all have to do that for ourselves. That doesn't mean we can't support each other in that activity, right? We can help create the conditions that support others and support ourselves in our practice. You know, we can support each other in making and carrying out vows. So again, Sesshin is a really good example. You know, we all have some little thing to contribute. Somebody's cooking meals, somebody's ringing bells, somebody's sweeping the floor, right? One person may be leading, but we're all supporting that aspiration. We're all supporting that direction, that intention to sit together and to practice together. So in order to do that kind of bodhisattva activity, to protect beings' intentions, right? And help cultivate their bodhicitta. In order to do that, we have to accept the true Dharma, as this gate statement is saying. I think that takes a lot of courage. I don't think that's an easy thing to do. It means we have to accept this one unified reality in its entirety. And this sutra reminds us that includes 84,000 Dharma gates. So, you know, when we do that bodhisattva vow, it says we're going through all the gates. Well, we're going to realize 84,000 Dharma gates. Will we live long enough to do that? In this case, in the case of this sutra, it's referring to 84,000 discourses of the Buddha. You know, somehow we're going to enter into and thoroughly understand and appreciate and carry around and propagate 84,000 discourses of the Buddha. Sometimes just in this tradition or in this practice, we take it to mean some uncountable number of opportunities to practice in our everyday, moment-by-moment life, every time we encounter something. And sometimes in a Dharma community, you know, when somebody's struggling with something, sometimes something relatively minor, ah, man, that was a real Dharma gate for me, right? That was a real opportunity for me to practice in that moment, to try to see clearly, to try to have wisdom and compassion, because my habituated thinking wanted to do something else, right? So it's not this kind of learning. It's full body and mind learning. So 84,000 Dharma gates. To take on 84,000 Dharma gates is like a big deal. Like, you know, who would choose to take on 84,000 Dharma gates? I also think it takes courage because it means willing to admit that a lot of the time we are managing our perceptions in order to make things more comfortable for ourselves. So sometimes we ignore the stuff we wish just wasn't there. We've all got stuff in our lives, in our brains, in our past, in our whatever, that we kind of just wish wasn't there. And the easiest thing to go is, doesn't exist, right? Don't want to think about that. Don't want to encounter that person. Don't want to remember that mistake I made. Sometimes what we want to do is find more acceptable reasons or justifications or something for the way things are. You know, we just want things to be different. And is that not the basis of suffering, right? Just simply wanting things to be other than they are is the most basic kind of suffering, right? So we'd like to paint a prettier picture. We'd like to tell a nicer story. We'd like to manage our perception of what's going on, our perception of the world. So to willingly choose to take the harder path, to take the more realistic path, I think is not an easy thing to do. It's a lot more comfortable to live in our fantasy world, right? It's a lot more comfortable to just sort of wrap the dreams around and go, not dealing with that. So to actually choose to say, I'm going to look through that. I'm going to see past that. I'm not going to negate those things, but I'm going to choose to see that that's probably not the entirety of what's going on. It's not a comfortable thing to do. So I think bodhisattva work takes a fair amount of guts, right? To sort of willingly put away the fairy tale and grow up, and all of that goes against the habits of self-preservation that we've been cultivating for a very, very long time. It's what the human ego does, right? Psychologically, it's what we do. We've had that kind of habit of self-protection for our whole lives, and so to suddenly go, I'm maybe not going to rely on my stories. I'm maybe going to see what's this world really doing. What's this universe really like? So if the true Dharma leaves nothing out, it's nothing outside the Buddha way, nothing outside the true Dharma, then there's no escaping the parts of this thing we don't like so much. That also means it doesn't leave anyone out. We can't sort of, oh, well, I don't like that person so much. Oh, well, that person makes me uncomfortable. Not if you're a bodhisattva, right? We inherit the whole thing. So all kinds of suffering get to come into our scope or our sphere. We don't get to look away from any suffering in the world. So all these beings that we're encountering, that we're including in our scope, that are falling within this one true reality, within accepting this true Dharma, bring in with them every kind of affliction, don't they? Some are afflictions that we share. Some are afflictions we don't ever want to have. People are coming in with mental disturbance and emotional negativity and unwholesome views and three poisons and just sort of delusion and confusion in general. And we just think, I've got enough of my own. I don't want any more. I don't need yours. You deal with yours and I'll deal with mine. Well, guess what? As a bodhisattva, there's no separation. That's all our stuff too. So people are coming in with everything that results in suffering. We don't get to ignore them. We don't get to not help them. So, not an easy thing to do, right? Making some bodhisattva vow, even privately, even if you don't stand up and take these things on, right? Even doing that privately, I think is a courageous thing to do. So the sutra goes on to say that those who accept the true Dharma become friends without being asked for the sake of all living beings. In their great compassion, they comfort and sympathize with living beings and become the Dharma mother of the world. Now, isn't that an interesting phrase? It sounds an awful lot like parental mind to me. maybe also to you, right? So again, this temple is named for Sanshin, 3 minds, right? The 3 minds that come from Dogen's Tenzo Kyoken. So joyful mind, magnanimous mind, and the mind of kindness or nurturing. Sometimes we call it grandmother mind. Does that not sound like being the Dharma mother of the world? So later on, the sutra says those who accept the true Dharma enter into Dharma friendship when the 4 groups of followers, monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, are forming rival factions that cause the destruction and dispersion of the Sangha. Those who enter into Dharma friendship will certainly receive the prediction of their future Buddhahood by all the Buddhas. So as we know, breaking the Sangha is like the biggest bad thing you can do. It's the biggest, baddest thing you can do, is to break your Sangha. So accepting the true Dharma means that we enter into the kind of Dharma friendship where we can either prevent that from happening or help when it happens somehow, right? When people are forming rival factions, somehow we are the kind of Dharma friends that can make that situation better. And that's, as I say, like the biggest problem a Sangha can have. So this is like big stuff, right? So the sutra ends by making the point that it's better to accept the true Dharma, and I think this is very interesting. It's better to accept the true Dharma than to do all the good deeds in the world. Kind of unexpected, at least to me. Why? Because accepting the true Dharma is larger. It's more extensive. So this great vow, this accepting the true Dharma, taking on the result of that, is bigger and more extensive than any single good deed. So the Bodhisattva vow is bigger than any individual good action that we may take without the intention of saving all beings. Still a good action, we still do a good action, but how much more virtuous maybe is it to take that action as part of a bodhisattva activity, part of a bodhisattva vow, right? So, a good action can be connected to ego. A good action can be connected to reward. I'm going to do something good so people will love me, or to impress somebody, or to get a promotion, or get somebody's vote, or, right, there's all kinds of reasons we do that stuff. There can be some self-clinging. Even there's just a little trace of an idea about what these 5 skandhas are, what I'm going to get out of that, me and them, there's some separation, right? So taking good action simply because it arises from the bodhisattva vow doesn't create that kind of separation, that kind of delusion. So actions are limited, bodhisattva vow is not. So, right, actions are limited, bodhisattva vow is endless. So I think this gives us some interesting things to consider with regard to a question that Sawyer brought up in our Wednesday, I'm going to point at you, our Wednesday book group several weeks ago, or maybe a month now. And it's come back a couple of times. And he was thinking about what is the difference between beneficial action taken on as part of practice, done as part of practice, done as part of being a bodhisattva, and the beneficial action that might be done by, say, a nonprofit, which is out to do good in the world. Like, what's the difference? Is that a fair summary of your question? So he's looking at these two things in ways, is there a difference? And if there's a difference, what is that? Which is a really interesting question. Because often we'll say, well, what we have to really look at is motivation. Well, in both cases, we've got some people who want to do good in the world. They're both motivated by sort of altruism, right? Nonprofit's not in it for the money. So what's the difference? Is there any material difference between these two things? So, interestingly, I think Queen Srimala would say that while the nonprofit work was certainly good action, the bodhisattva vow was bigger. Now, I've spent a lot of years working in nonprofits. Most of my secular career was in nonprofits. So I know a thing or two about nonprofit mission statements. And when I think about a mission statement for a nonprofit, it usually includes some kind of target constituency, right? Some kind of stakeholder group. It identifies who it's trying to serve, who it's trying to help. Standard bodhisattva vows, or any personal vows we may write, just simply say all beings. I don't know a nonprofit who has a mission statement that says, our intention is do such and so for all beings. If you find one, let me know. They probably got a budget as big as All Outdoors. In order to do their work and in order to be effective, they really have to think carefully about who can we best serve. given the resources, the skill set, the geography, the need in the world, whatever, we have to figure out who are we most effectively able to serve. And in that way, they must limit themselves. It's not a bad thing. It's how they have to function. Then we think about the personal mission statement, the Bodhisattva vow, whether it's a standard one we've accepted or one we've written ourselves. There's nothing in there that says I'm going to define my people, my beings. It says I'm here for all beings. You know, I often say this thing means open for business, right? So it's I don't know if, when I came across this, I thought about your question and I thought I wouldn't have considered it that way, but I thought that was helpful. So maybe in our Sangha discussions, this will come back around, because I thought of your question, which I thought was good. So again, the gate statement for today: acceptance of the right dharma is a gate of dharma illumination, for it eradicates the afflictions of all living beings. So accepting this right dharma, what does that look like? That seems like a pretty simple phrase. Accepting this right dharma is not just going along with something because the Buddha said so, or because you read it in a Zen book, or even because Hojo-san may have said it, which we know is the highest possible. Accepting the right dharma is seeing the world the way Buddha sees it, using, Buddha's eyes, based on prajna. How does Buddha see the world? So once we see things that way, we have a direct personal experience of what the Buddhas and ancestors are talking about. And once we have that, once we see that, we can't unsee it. We can cover it up. We can forget about it. We can choose not to, we can't unsee it, which is really kind of interesting. So accepting this right dharma, seeing the way Buddha sees, once we see the world that way, we can't unsee it. So you can try to give up this practice. You can try to give up those insights. You can try to go back to your life the way it was before, maybe to make other people happy, but you can't. And if you try, you'll be very unhappy, and you will feel like your entire life is now one big lie. You can't unsee the true Dharma when you see it. Trust me. Once it's got you, it's got you. So this doesn't mean, oh, you have a flash of enlightenment and then you're enlightened forever and ever and there's no more practice to do. We know. Dogen tells us all the time. That's not the way it works. You keep practicing, keep practicing, keep practicing. There's something about seeing, understanding that you're seeing through your delusion and you're seeing through your story, and you can't unsee that. So once you develop some prajna and start to see what Buddhas and ancestors are talking about, in my experience, there's then no other logical way to see things, right? When you see what they're talking about, you go, oh, of course that's the way it is. And you sort of can't think about things in another way. So you kind of have to accept the true Dharma because, like, there it is, big as life. It's right in front of you. There's no getting around it. But as hard as Sushin, as hard and as uncomfortable as it is to accept the way things are, the good news is that according to this gate, that's the start of dealing with the suffering of all beings, including this one. So Uchiyama Roshi says, by accepting and properly understanding the true nature of both accidental and undeniable realities, and by living in accord with this understanding, the matter of living and dying will cease to be such a terrible problem. So in other words, if we clearly see and accept the reality of both our karmic circumstances and the three marks of existence, he's calling this accidental, both accidental and undeniable realities. So the things that, are our karmic stuff, and the things that are true regardless of our karmic stuff. If we clearly see and accept the reality of both of those things, or form and emptiness, if you want to look at it that way, we make less trouble for ourselves. Things start to get easier. They don't get easy, but they get easier, right? And that's the moment we can really start to dedicate ourselves to a bodhisattva vow. Things start to clear, right? So in his statement of his personal vows, Dogen includes accepting the true Dharma. He says, when I encounter the true Dharma, I will discard mundane principles and accept and maintain the Buddha Dharma, right? So I will, accept and maintain this thing when I encounter it. So like Queen Shrimala, He's vowing to abandon mundane attachments like body, life, and wealth, attachments to this samsaric world, and focus on right dharma as a kind of life direction. So here we are again, putting this right dharma at the center of whatever we're doing, whatever life we're living. So Hojo-san also makes this connection between prajna and vow. He says, to follow the bodhisattva path, we practice prajna paramita, the wisdom that sees impermanence, no self, emptiness, and interdependent origination. When we clearly see this reality, that we and other things exist together without fixed independent entities, our practice is strengthened. We understand to live by vow is not to accept a fixed doctrine, but is a natural expression of our life force. So this is an important point. We can memorize all those 84,000 discourses of the Buddha, right? We can memorize everything the Buddhas and ancestors ever said or ever taught, and it won't help us with accepting the true Dharma. Because we can't pin down the true Dharma, can we? Once you write something down, it's like, there it is, right? It's kind of dead. That's, true Dharma isn't like that. True Dharma is moving all the time. It's moving, it's changing, it's functioning. Jiju Yuzamai is happening, right? We can't really pin it down. So that's another reason why this gate statement is not just about going along with something you read in a Zen book, right? So it's not about accepting a fixed doctrine. Accepting true Dharma is not accepting a fixed doctrine. It's seeing the world clearly in all the ways that it's moving and changing and manifesting and coming and going. So we need to have the prajna to see all that happening for ourselves as it happens all around us, which it does all the time. We need the courage to act on that as our vow, right? First we see it, or as part of this thing, we see it. We have the courage to act on it on our vow, as our vow, and that is how we eradicate the afflictions of all living beings. So, what would you like to say this morning, or ask, or bring up? You'll be pleased to know I didn't talk for the whole hour. So, there was a little time for those who would like to discuss. What would you all like to say this morning? Let's start with people in the room, because I can see you. And those, I realize for those coming out of Sesshin, that may be a big ask. Shinko, please.
There was what's coming up for me that strikes me a lot of times. And, to bodhisattva vows, or to be a bodhisattva, including also moral conditions. So it says moral conditions are made by society. It's a kind of statement from time, and this was surely different in India, in China, in Japanese, and up to now. And now this is made by a government council. They say this is right and this is not. For example, easiest thing is homosexuality. It is, I think it was in the 19th, in a lot of European states, that homosexuality is
illegal.
Yeah, illegal. Yeah. And now, over the last years, and also now, we see a lot of things that does not include all beings. And as bodhisattva, I have to include all beings, if they are accepted or not, if they are within the right side or not. So that strikes me. Yeah, maybe you can say something on this.
Well, you also do a fair amount of chaplaincy, right?
Yes.
With people who are outside of society in some way.
Absolutely.
Not acceptable to the majority of society in some way, right?
Yeah.
So how do you find your practice affected by that? I'm throwing this one back at you. Why? Because you're this yourself.
Yeah.
It's an interesting,
Yeah,
so, the kind of Dharma
yeah.
leadership that you're choosing to focus on, and bless you for doing it, It means this is a very real practice situation for you.
Is-
You know,
is-
people may be looking at you, we know people are looking at you and saying, don't bring those people in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then what do you do?
Yeah.
You know, it's a real challenge to your vow.
Yeah.
And yet, right, our vow is bigger than our whole life. We know we're never going to come to the end of that vow. It takes longer than forever, as Todo-san reminds us, right? So somehow, in the midst of other forces which are encouraging us not to look broadly, not to include all beings, only to focus on people who are worthy in some way, how do we continue to have the courage to carry out that vow? That's why I say this is not easy. Because it might be, I'm willing to include all these beings, but the people around me are telling me not to. Now what do I do? Right?
Yes. So in my experience, it needs a lot of skillful means to include everybody. Also the people they say this is not right at the moment, yeah? Because they are also part of this all beings, yeah? And skillful means are very important in this. To be not on this side or to be not on the other side, to be in the midst, to live the middle way.
Right.
Yeah?
Well,
this does not mean a compromise.
and you've made another important point, which is the people who might disagree with our vow to include all beings also don't get left out.
Yeah, this
Right?
this is very important.
The irony is we can't leave out our quote-unquote opposition. How do we care for them in a skillful and wise and compassionate way? Real, you know, that's
Not easy.
many layers, many layers. It's not easy to do. So those who are engaged in social justice, you know, practitioners in this country, for instance, who are engaged in social justice work, encounter these kinds of things, right? They want to work with particular populations, or they want to work with particular issues, and it doesn't have to be human beings. It can be environmental issues or other things, right? There's always going to be somebody who says, don't do that. Don't worry about that. There's something more important, or what you're trying to do somehow threatens my clinging, right? Don't bring those people here, or whatever that is. And yet, we're bodhisattvas for them also. So it is not an easy thing to do. So in that case, then, skillful means are important. So it's not only seeing clearly with compassion and recognizing that all of these beings are also, if I'm the Dharma mother of the world, all of these beings are also my children. I also have to see clearly enough, with enough wisdom, to say what's the right thing to do here. I'm not going to make everybody happy all the time. Right? So what am I called to do in this moment for the greatest good, for the greatest number of beings? Did you want to jump in?
As long as I'm not
Please.
interrupting, just building on that point, something kind of crossed my mind. You were talking earlier about boundaries, and I had an experience recently where I was close to someone that I had to assert like a pretty hard boundary with, sort of like uninvolve them from my life. And I think that in an interesting way, that was, I had been excluding them in a way by like pretending that I wasn't affected, or that like we had a relationship, and I was ignoring these things that were doing. It's like, actually the only way I know how to fully include you in my life is to not in a superficially paradoxical way. So,
That makes complete sense.
you know, and I think that's something that comes up in the same kinds of communities where people are caregivers or helpers professionally. Like, you can find this sort of like pathological altruism where people don't know when a boundary is a way of including.
Yeah. Well, so we have to be skillful for ourselves as well as other beings. If you're raising a toddler, you must set boundaries, or that toddler will learn bad behavior, right? I mean, you are being compassionate, a compassionate Dharma mother or father by setting some boundaries. Sometimes we have to do that in relationships. So, being a bodhisattva doesn't mean we make everybody happy all the time by giving them everything they think they need. It's not possible. Sometimes it's not healthy, right? So, to decide not to exclude, not to ignore this relationship, but to take action after careful thought and consideration and wisdom and compassion, even if that means I can't be around you anymore, or I have to be around you under certain conditions, that could be wholesome for both of you. Because the first wholesome thing you did was not look away, as hard as that is. And there's no one right answer, right? Somebody else could have looked at that circumstance and said, I would have done something else, and we go, bless you. You can't look at in this tradition, you don't look at a book and go, oh, number 5, the answer is, one of the other reasons that bodhisattva life takes some courage, right? But job 1 is don't look away. So, other reflections on that point or any others, please?
Another point, it seems so utterly hopeless to hear that that the practice never ends, and if you if you have seen the true Dharma, then you will never forget. I think I forget all the time. Sometimes I think, oh, now I understand something, and then I forget, and I come back into clinging, and I want something out of my practice, and
Yep.
so I think maybe I haven't seen the true Dharma.
Well, so I would not say that we don't forget, because we do forget. That's why we keep practicing, right? But in my experience, you see something, it shifts your experience of the world in a particular way. And it might not even be something that you're consciously aware of moment after moment after moment after moment. So I'll give you an example. I remember many years ago, first starting out my practice, and I suppose I had been reading about or hearing about something about the fact that things have some existence outside of what I think of them. And that was like news to me. Right? It's news to most of us. When somebody, this thing exists no matter what you think about it. It's got an existence. It's functioning. It's doing what it's going to do. It might not be what you like, but it doesn't really care. It's holding its dharma position, right? And I'm sure I must have intellectually gone, well, maybe. And I remember looking at my chest of drawers. I had a wicker chest of drawers one night, and I looked at that and I said, oh, that's what they mean by the original nature of everything is tranquility. In other words, this thing is not, if I'm disturbed by this thing, that doesn't mean that thing is disturbed. Right? The original nature of everything is tranquility. I've never been able to find that quote, so I must have been paraphrasing something, but I went, oh. Like, oh. So it wasn't like, it's not like a flash of lightning. It's like, oh, I can start to see why, I've got my perceptions about everything, and I'm living in this little kind of world of my perceptions, but wait a minute, there's something else. Like, there's this little pinhole in there, So I'm sure I turned around in the next moment and kicked the dog and, yelled at my partner and did all the things we do, but there's something about that. I mean, look, even today I remember that moment of going, there's that chest of drawers and it doesn't care what I think about it. It exists regardless of whether I'm here or what I think about it. So I think we have those little flashes of prajna that kind of shift our thinking. So we cover them back up because we're deluded human beings and we don't act from that place most of the time, and then we get back on the cushion and we try again, right? But that has always felt to me like once you see the Dharma, you can't unsee it. Once you start practicing and you start kind of getting it, it's very difficult to backpedal. Am I speaking from experience? Oh, yes, I am. You probably can tell that, right? We get into something and then we start to change as people. Our perceptions change a little bit. Our values change a little bit. We start to not get angry about the stuff we used to get angry about, and our friends and family look at us and say, you're changing. I'm not okay with that. You're not the person I married, gave birth to, moved in next to, hired. Go back to what I know, even if I didn't like it so much, it was familiar territory. How do you unsee what you saw in Zendo? How do you go back? Can you give that up? I tried to do it, and it felt like someone was reaching in and pulling out all my nerve endings. It was the most painful thing I've ever tried to do, and clearly it didn't work. Right? You can't unsee it. Once you kind of see the logic of it, you just can't not live that way anymore in a certain kind of way, even though we forget and stumble and, right? So I'm not here to say there's a flash of lightning, that's it, you leap off the wheel, you're done. That's not it. But there's something that you begin to see. You begin to have some experience of prajna, and like, you can't give that up because it doesn't let go of you. Did you?
Yeah, I was just going to add that one of the dharmas I find myself working with often is just being available to the moment. I mean, that's part of my practice. I find a lot, not being so buried inside the self that I'm out there. And thing happened a while back where I was driving along the road and a person was on a bicycle coming the other direction. And it was a little bit busy, but I looked in my mirror and this person had had an accident. And I thought, oh, geez, I'm sorry. You know, and I kept driving. I thought, wait a minute, I need to go back. And so I turn around and go back. They're already gone. But I thought, you know, I kind of missed that point there when somebody probably needed some help.
Yep. And it might have been that, you know, that was a busy road, you couldn't have turned around, it wouldn't have been safe for you to do that, but if it was, you know. So job one is notice, and then job two is carry out the bodhisattva vow to help all beings, right? So it's an interesting way to think about that, being available. Because of course, in a way, we're never not available. Open for business, right? You're wearing one of these things too. Open for business. And yet, we make ourselves unavailable. Well, I don't have time. Well, that's not my problem. Well, that's, you know, that person makes me uncomfortable. Well, I have to get to work. Sometimes we do.
Can I add?
Please.
You know, this group, this recovery group I am part of on Thursday evenings, I wear my Roxu in there. And it's a Dharma recovery group. And you said something one time before me going in there, and it's helped me think about, you know, the Rakasu is like a signboard.
Yep.
Half of a signboard there. And it's not that I'm proud, I'm a Buddhist, or, you know, I'm the only one in the group. No, and I kind of had to explain that because for me it's a strange kind of embarrassment, but also an opening up. So
Yeah. Well, you know, we take precepts and then we start to wear these things, and somehow we're Dharma leaders, even if we don't feel like we're ready to be Dharma leaders. But there's something about taking those vows, you know, publicly admitting you're a Buddhist, and putting it out there, and then seeing what happens, right? So, you know, when I do precepts, I'll sometimes say to people, you're going to start wearing this thing, and people are now going to know you're the one to ask, where's the bathroom? And can I get a chant card? And what did that word mean? And I say, you know, that's good. Help people if you can. Don't, you know, you're not a teacher. Don't set yourself up to be a teacher. But this is, now you have another way to help all beings. You've clearly provided a public image of your commitment to this practice. And there's something really interesting about practicing with that. So a few people here are wearing Roxus and maybe have some things to say about that. So yes, there is a personal thing that says, you know, I'm making this vow to kind of hold me on the path to my practice, but then there's also something else that says, open for business, right? Here's my signboard, Buddha lives here, you know? What else would people like to say or ask? People in the room?
So I'm curious, your dresser drawer, you said?
Yeah, I have a chest of drawers. Yeah.
Well, we'll bring it into the Zindo. So we got the glass of water there. It's created some karma today.
Yep.
And so it does not care what you think about it.
It doesn't care what I think about it.
And it has an existence apart from your thinking about it.
In a way.
And yet, there's no separation.
Right?
So reflect on that.
Right? So it's completely doing its total dynamic functioning. I don't have to like what it's doing. I don't have to control what it's doing. You know, it's carrying out its dharma position. It's 100% being the reality of what it is. I have some perception of that. My reality includes this thing. I'm functioning together with this thing because there's no separation, and yet, right? So we have form and emptiness all the time. We have, as Hojo-san says, independence is good, but isolation is not necessary. Right? So this has an independent, you know, a form. We can identify it, we can give it a name, we can use it for something, and also not separate from this one unified reality. So it doesn't care what I think about it, it's not going to change its thusness, right? It goes on doing what it's going to do, regardless of whether I like it, hate it, whatever, and yet there's still some kind of separation here, right? How do we hold both of those things? It's not easy, is it? What do you think about it?
Well, it's still affected by, I mean, everything is so intimately connected with everything that even though it, quote, doesn't care what you think, it nevertheless is affected by your thoughts, as everything is.
Sure,
Because every difference makes a difference.
sure. So the butterfly flaps its wings and the tornado happens around the world, right? So everything is connected. But there was something about the moment when I looked at that chest of drawers and said, there's something here that's bigger than my emotional response, which was very helpful, right? That's the moment something cracked me out of thinking my perception was all there was.
So sit like a Chester drawer.
Pardon me?
Sit like a Chester drawer.
Sit like a chest of drawers or a glass of wine. Other things in this room? Sawyer, anybody online want to say something?
So I have a question.
Okay.
The default way we live is by protecting ourselves in the world and looking after our self-centered interests and all. And that's the default coping up mechanism that we use. And moving from there to living by vow, it seems difficult. I mean, we have to encounter difficult people and then put them ahead of us. So what are some practical ways of doing this? It requires faith, but faith alone cannot really last long. Like, what are some practical ways of doing this? Yeah.
Can somebody summarize for me? I was having trouble understanding. Somebody in the room who heard it better? We're moving
from like when living by vow. Like, what are some practical ways to live by vow in the regular world when with the difficult people and situations?
I see. So once we choose to be on this path, how do we stay on it? Because boy, it's not easy, is it? The rest of the world feels like it wants to pull us right off this path. Well, I think we have handrails, and two of them immediately come to mind. One is Sangha, right? To practice with other people who are doing this crazy thing. The value of that cannot be overstated. I think it's, there's a reason why Sangha is one of the three treasures. We kind of need to be sitting and practicing with people who are doing this. So to have Dharma's brothers and sisters ahead of us on the path is helpful. Even if we're all beginners and we're simply getting together once a week in someone's living room to sit zazen and have a cup of tea. To stay on this path, I think Sangha is really helpful. In this day and age when we maybe even can't do that physically and we can only do it by Zoom, at least it's some connection. But I also think we have things like precepts, right, that are guidelines in some way. They are not rules, but they can give us some direction and help us think about the actions that we're taking on a moment by moment by moment basis. So a lot of this practice can feel very abstract. We pull out the Shobogenzo and he's talking about all kinds of things that feel very abstract. Some of his writing feel very abstract. But if we look at things like precepts, and if we look at Dogen's writings about sort of rules for the temple, if you will, and we take those out of the temple and we just say, how does this apply to my life? How do I work with other, how do I live and eat and sleep and work with other human beings? There are those things in this tradition that at least give us some trellis on which to grow our practice. But of course, what's one or two of the most important elements here? It's vow and repentance, right? So it's not just vow. We can't just vow and say, well, that's the end of it. As soon as we make the vow, we also have to do the repentance. The repentance doesn't mean I am a terrible person. I didn't carry out my bodhisattva vow. I didn't get through all 84,000 dharma gates in this lifetime. This is not about beating ourselves up. Repentance simply says, I will never be done. Repentance is this thing that says we never get to the end, that we can't, we're taking these vows, we can't save all beings. We recognize our practice is not complete. We accept that that's the nature of this, And in the next moment, we vow again. So this vow and repentance is working all the time. I think it would be easier to fall off this path if we didn't have repentance. Because we would have no way to recognize we're doing something which in this limited human form is difficult, if not impossible. We tend to want to hold up a yardstick and say this is a measure of success and we failed, and that somehow that's not okay. I think it's quite healthy for us to say, yes, we're going to make the vow. Bodhicitta arises. I feel called to be a bodhisattva in the world. I want to help human beings and other beings and, go through all the gates and save everybody and realize the Buddha way. And yet, in this limited human form, I can't finish that. And that's okay. Because if we don't have that understanding, we'll never take the vow. I can't tell you how many people say before they take lay precepts, well, I'd love to do that, but gosh, I just know I'm going to break them, so I can't go forward. I can't take the precepts because I just know, well, of course. What I look at them and say is, of course you will. We all do. That doesn't stop you from taking the vow, right? That doesn't stop you from having an intention, having a direction. Just like, we don't not take the good action, even if we notice there's a little bit of self-clinging in there, it's still a good action. So, we don't not take precepts because we know we're going to break them. That's about having the intention. So it feels a little bit like it releases the pressure. It's like a pressure valve to know, I'm going to take this vow. It's going to be incredibly hard. There is going to be nothing about it that looks like success. At what point do I say I've now saved all beings? Well, gosh, I only saved 17 beings today, and it wasn't. There's no yardstick, right? So if we know there's no yardstick, and we accept that there's no yardstick, and yet that it's still meaningful, worthwhile to take the vow and to do the bodhisattva actions that we can do, we don't fall off. Because why do we fall off? We get discouraged. Oh, well, this isn't going well. I'm not getting everything out of it that I think I should be getting, or somehow I'm not saving enough beings. What's the measure? What does success look like? We have to, as soon as we take the vow, we have to say, and there's no success, right? We have to say, and this will always be incomplete, so that we can get up the next day and do it again. I just think there's something really meaningful about bodhisattva vows because we know every morning when we get up, we have something to do. There is no point, if we've taken bodhisattva vows, even privately, there is no point where we get up in the morning and go, my life is just not worth living. Right? I have nothing to do today. I have nothing to contribute. Really? Look again at those 4 bodhisattva vows. There's always something we can do. What else would people at home like to say? I'll go on forever, so I need to let somebody else into the conversation. Sawyer, anybody else?
Clear.
Okay.
I have one maybe
Please.
last question.
Good. You get the last word.
Especially in the context of sesshin just happening, and I think I've had the experience a couple of times moving through sesshin, and then we have a dharma talk, and yeah, either it feels very relevant, like sometimes it feels very related to what we were just doing. Sometimes it feels like, wait, I was just sitting looking at the wall, and now we're talking about saving all beings, and it almost feels unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
The mundane activity of just moving through these 5 days. And so I'm wondering what you would say about sort of zazen itself as freeing all beings. So it's like what this room just contained was sort of people doing this activity that is said to be sometimes as saving all beings itself, rather than sort of a preparation to go out and, be grounded and do your work.
Right.
But that somehow the sesshin itself. So
yeah. Well, that's a week's work right there. so many things coming up around that. Okay, I think we can often see zazen as a means to an end. As much as we hear zazen is good for nothing, right? I think we can often consider our practice to be a means to an end. So I'm going to sit zazen in order to understand Dogen better. I'm going to sit zazen in order to be a kinder person. I'm going to sit zazen in order to save all beings. Well, as we know, if we sit zazen with the object in mind, we have a problem. We also know zazen is good for nothing is not the same as zazen has no result. So, we might well get up from the cushion a little bit wiser, a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more clear-headed, a little bit better able to say this thing doesn't care what I think about it. We're not clinging to that. It may happen. So, we can say a regular practice of zazen perhaps loosens the grip of the three poisons, and when we get out the door to deal with, beings that agitate us, maybe we do that in a little more skillful way. So all of that, yeah. And also, the first thing I thought of when I heard your question was, zazen is the place where we can't break any precepts. And if we can't break any precepts, we're liberating beings, because we're not perpetuating suffering on anybody. Now, why do we think that when we're sitting zazen, why do we know that when we're sitting zazen, we can't break any precepts? One of the examples I use is something like, okay, so we're sitting zazen. Unfortunately, we're thinking. We're trying to let go of thought. Thought comes up. I realize, I'm really angry with my neighbor, right? I'm not about to get up from that cushion and, go find my knife. Right? I'm not going to get up and break a precept. I've made some commitment to sit here for 50 minutes. I'm going to sit here for 50 minutes. So there is something that says it's a safe place for that stuff to come up because why? We're not going to take action on it. What do we use to create karma? Body, speech, and mind. So if I'm sitting zazen, I'm not going to get up with this body and take an unskillful action. I'm not going to say something unskillful because we're not talking. And if I'm really doing zazen, I'm going to let go of thought, 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 right? So I can watch these things come up. I can see that they're there. I don't have to engage with them. I don't have to write a story about them. I don't have to negate them, dissolve them, push them away. I don't have to do anything with them. They can just be there. And I'm not creating harmful karma with body, speech, and mind. I'm simply being, right? So at least for that 50 minutes, we can say we're saving all beings because we're not out there perpetuating suffering. So if we were sitting here for 5 days, and there's all of us sitting here for 5 days doing zazen, not breaking precepts, I hope we've done a little, saving of beings in the world. So I think there's multiple, as I say, that's a week-long conversation. There's multiple ways to think about that. Zazen may have a result. We're not aiming at the result. We're not clinging to the result. It may have a result that says I'm a little more clear-headed when I, get up from the cushion. I see my stuff a little more clearly. I'm a little less likely to leak that onto somebody. But at the very moment of sitting, I am just sitting. The only thing that's happening here is total dynamic functioning, universe doing what it does, everything happening the way it's supposed to happen. I'm not perpetuating suffering. I'm opening the hand, right? There's some liberation going on. Do you have a particular place you were going with that question? Or a particular thing that occurs to you?
That feels very relevant, and I think I've had I've come to think of zazen as a way of practicing harmlessness.
Yes.
I mean, you're just being
Yes.
harmless, being totally harmless.
Yes.
With others, and then also something about dropping self, dropping body and mind of this person, just by being not separate from other beings.
Yep.
That is itself
Yes.
somehow freeing beings.
Yes, sure. Because what are we doing when we're sitting there looking at the wall and dropping off body and mind? We are accepting the true dharma. We are taking the great vow that says, I'm going to save all beings, right? How is that not part of this thing, right? If we're sitting zazen, completely being 100% whatever we are, thusness, suchness, Buddha nature, We're dropping our perceptions about what these 5 skandhas are, what we think we're supposed to be doing, what this zazen is about, all these stories that we want to write. We're just sitting. We are completely identical with this one true Dharma, with this one unified reality, and in the midst of that, there's the great vow that says, I can't harm beings because I'm not separate from them. Right? It's like the biggest non-harming there can be. Right? So, there might be something that feels a little bit linear, but I think we have to say, and also, in this exact moment of zazen, what's going on? When we deeply investigate the nature of zazen, we're deeply investigating the nature of this one unified reality, and in the midst of that, what is non-harming? So another fine question from Sawyer that will keep us going for a while, I think. Sawyer asks the big questions. Other things this morning from anybody? Please.
If I can just wrap up what I feel like there's been sort of a theme
Oh, yes.
going about, what you say about I'm open for business, and yet that brings up the question of, the discernment of, how much do you let somebody just come in and take from you, and situations where you are working in the public and you need to, there's just a lot of discernment involved. When you open up and say, I'm open for business.
Yep.
How am I being called to serve?
Yep.
And I think that it comes down to not how I am being called to serve, but how Spirit is, how I am allowing Spirit to work through me. And even with the situation with the passing somebody on the road and realizing, oh, I should have gone back, that even the turning around and going back was a moment of saying Spirit was working through me right there, and that might have been exactly the right thing. Maybe that person was supposed to meet somebody else down the road, and it's just, even what the monk over here was saying about, how do you stay there? How do you stay there? And it's just that, to me, meditation brings you back to that selflessness of how being in that place of I'm open for business. It's not I. It's allowing it to work through me.
Right. Yes. So if we can clearly see Jiju Yodamai, if we can clearly see how the universe is functioning, we're looking at all kinds of discernment. Discernment is a word I love. People here will tell you it's coming out of my mouth every 10 minutes. What are the karmic circumstances? For us, we would say karmic circumstances. What are the karmic circumstances involved here? In other words, what are my skills, ability, availability? What am I good at? What can I do in this moment? That's the concrete stuff, right? In addition to what's the larger functioning that's happening, right? So it takes wisdom to be able to see all of that, to know what open for business really means, right? Because we can have a lot of ideas about what being a bodhisattva is. And that draws us into things like being martyrs. Being a martyr is an ego trip. That is not what bodhisattva activity is about. I have an idea about who I should be as somebody who serves in a selfless way. That's not me responding right now. What's in front of me right now? Oh, Buddhists should never raise their voices. They should never be angry. Well, sometimes you need to get somebody's attention, right? That doesn't mean you're motivated by hatred and ill will. It means, there's something that's not right here. There's something that has to happen. So I think we have to be careful not to get locked into what we think that looks like, what that open for business looks like. So I'll just say briefly, these two, who are my students, know we do a lot of discernment before I put a robe on anybody's back. We do a lot of discernment. What kind of Dharma leadership do you feel called to do? And that takes into account what is your history, skills, background, interests, ability, what's available to you where you are. Do you want to be running a temple? Do you want to be teaching in a classroom? Do you want to be doing social action? Do you want to be a chaplain? What do you want to be doing? Because there's so many ways to sort of formally take that on, right? I really want people not to make assumptions that only looks like a couple of things, or that the way they do it has to look like the way I do it, right? It has to be very much about, in your terms, what is Spirit calling me to do? Me, through me, you know, this container, what does that look like? We don't always know. We take vows, we wear these things, we think we know what we're doing. As soon as we put them on our back the first time, we go, what the hell did I just do? Like, whose idea was this? You know? And then we spend the rest of our careers doing the discernment about what does this actually mean. So to give somebody a robe and a dharma name is an interesting invitation into discernment. So, you know, in this body and mind, what does that look like? That's an important lifelong practice too, I think. So, don't get me started. I love discernment. I just think it's really interesting. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I would like to mention something that it happened in the world. It is my place. I come from the state called Odisha, that's in India. You probably might have heard the tragic incident that took place on Friday. 3 trains, 2 carrying loads of passengers. The 3rd train was a goat. They all collided. You see, in a fraction of a second, almost 300 people, innocent people, are gone. Thousands are injured. So let us take 30 seconds of your time to do the prayer for those souls, innocent souls leaving this earth. Can you please do that for 30 seconds?
So let's sit quietly and be with that situation. And maybe if you want to ring a bell, give us 30 seconds or a minute, and then just ring a bell to tell us we're going to finish. Penetrate into each thing in all places, so that together we and all beings may realize the Buddha way. Thank you for that. Let's wrap up for today. Thank you very much.